Use for inlay, I've got this selection of woods. This is a type of ebony which I've sliced into veneers, and I'll use one of those for the stock. For the nodes in between, I like to use something a little bit lighter, so I've got this sycamore, which has this nice mottled appearance, and I'll use that for the nodes in between. Basically, I'll be working from background to foreground. So pieces that are further away, I will do the inlay first, and then I'll work my way to pieces that are more in the foreground. So the piece where the inlay is coming from actually gets taped to the back. So we turn this piece over, we use some masking tape, tape it in place. And then I need an entry hole, which is where the scroll saw blade will pass through. So I'll give myself an entry hole here. And I'm putting the entry hole in a place where I know I'm going to come back later and inlay this piece of ebony so that that hole will disappear. So now we'll feed the scroll saw blade through this hole in the back. Feed the whole assembly onto the scroll saw. And now you can notice that the table of the scroll saw is tilted at an angle. And this angle is very important because as I'm cutting the piece in this direction, I'll be moving the whole wood assembly in this direction. The piece underneath, the inlay piece, is going to have beveled edges. And so that the piece underneath will be slightly larger than the piece I'm cutting out of the top piece of wood. And if I've got the angle just right, that piece will fit in snugly and there won't be any gaps. That's what I'm shooting for, is no gaps. The angle is a function of the thickness of the veneer and the thickness of the blade. So when I've cut that piece, I can toss the waste and save the inlay piece. Okay, so now I have my two inlay pieces, so I can remove the tape. And so I have a little bit of white glue that I'll use to spread on the edges. And before I do the glue, I just want to show you that this piece fits in from the back, and so it's snug with no gaps on the surface. It doesn't fit in from this side because remember, both the cut and the inlay piece have 8-degree bevels on their edges. So they only fit from the back, and they don't fall through, and they have a nice snug fit with no gaps. So I can spread a little bit of glue on the edges, like so, just enough to hold it in place. I can feel that this veneer is slightly thicker than the veneer I'm inlaying into, so it's a little bit proud. So I have a block plane here, and I'll just level it off so that it's flush on top, a little proud on the back too. I'll often make the inlay veneers just slightly thicker so that if there's any discrepancy in, if the angle isn't just perfect, there's enough extra to make sure that I get a nice tight fit. So now we've got these two little node places in place. So the next piece will be the dark stock, and that's what I want to use this ebony for. Wood has graphics. The grain gives you opportunities to accentuate your design if you pay attention to it. With this design, I'm kind of considering that light is coming from this angle, so that you would think that this side might be more in shadow and this side might be more in light. And so maybe if I can use this lighter band as this edge of the bamboo stalk, and then some of these darker parts over here, it will help give that illusion of there being some sunlight and there being some depth to the piece. So we'll set that piece aside, and I lined it up just nicely so we've got some of this lighter lighter part of the ebony right on the edge, and then darker on the other side. So now we've got our bamboo stock all in place. And so we need to move on to the leaves. And one thing I find is useful in trying to make these images come alive is to try and convey a sense of movement. So in this case, thinking about a little bit of wind blowing in this direction, it's sort of flipping up this leaf a little bit, so that things are interacting with nature and there's a little bit of movement going on. So I'm going to use this yellow heart for a couple of these leaves, and then use the darker acacia for a couple of the others. And I've got some overlap areas here, and I always try and create some overlap because it helps with the illusion of three-dimensionality. It's also nice to create little shadow effects, and we can do that by using hot sand on a leaf. What I do when I'm going to do sand shading, what I'll do is I'll put the piece in place without glue, and I'll give myself some pencil marks where I want there to be shadow. Take the piece out, and I've got this pot of hot sand here, and this is just beach sand from the local beach. And what I do is I dip the piece in, and we're trying to create a little bit of a shadow. We don't want to combust the piece. We don't want it to go up in flames. But it's a little tricky procedure because when the piece is all done and glued up, we're going to sand it to polish it up and level it. And in the process, we'll lose a little bit of the shadow. So I need to go a little further than I want the shadow to ultimately be, but you can see I'm creating a darker area at the base of that leaf. And it's also starting to smoke a little, so you can tell that it's getting quite hot. So what I usually like to do is take a little bit of water and a paper towel and just cool that piece off to stop the burning process, and also make it a little easier to handle. But there I've got my shadow. Now I can go ahead and glue that in place. This is called hot sand shading. It's an old technique. Marquetry is an ancient technique, and it was developed in Europe during the Renaissance. And they used this technique during that time as well. And there we have our leaf, and you can see when I overlap the next leaf, you'll have a little bit of a shadow there, which helps create depth. So at this point we can jump now to the next piece. Now we have our finished piece, and we want to, or I want to, glue it up to this piece of 3/8 inch plywood core. And when you're working with veneer, anytime you do one thing to one side of the plywood, you want to do the same thing to the other. So I have a piece of a scrap of cherry veneer, which I'm going to put on the other side. So it's basically a sandwich. Veneer on one side, plywood in the middle, veneer on the other side. And we need a press in order to put consistent pressure over the entire thing while the glue is drying. With something this small, it's very simple just to take some scraps of plywood, and I like to use a couple layers because it helps distribute the pressure. And so I've got a couple layers of plywood. I've got a layer of thick cardboard, which helps distribute any irregularities in the surface, make sure every part of the work has pressure on it. So a piece of cardboard. And it's not corrugated cardboard, it's the, I don't know what you call it, press board or something, but it's like 1/8 of an inch piece of cardboard. A couple pieces of newspaper so that if any glue squeezes through the woodwork, you're not going to ruin the piece of cardboard, and you can reuse that. So a couple pieces of paper, and then same thing on the other side. when you're gluing veneer, you never apply the glue to the veneer itself because the glue contains moisture, obviously. So if you put moisture on one side, this part of the wood's going to start to expand while the other side doesn't, and pretty soon you'll have something like this, which is very hard to work with. So glue only goes on the plywood, and I like to use this roller to distribute the glue. So spread on some glue. We'll roll it around. And with this roller, you don't need to press, because if you press, you're just making puddles. But very light pressure, almost just the weight of the roller itself. And then you take that and flip it, place it down on your veneer, and do the same on the other side. And we'll just make sure that this piece is centered on the plywood. And to keep things from moving around when I put it all in the press, I use a few pieces of blue tape. I use blue tape and not white tape because white tape, once it goes through the press, is very difficult to remove. The stickum on the blue tape is not quite as aggressive, and it's possible to remove it after you've pressed the work. So that's all ready to go. So we take our 1/2 of the veneer press, put this in place, take the other half, flip it over. Now we've got our sandwich. And now I'm just using 1/2 dozen of these shop clamps to apply pressure. So there, and then I generally would give a piece like that overnight to set up. So that's the veneer press. So we've got a piece in the press. It needs to stay in the press for several hours. I've gone ahead and pressed a piece ahead of time so that you can see what the finished work looks like. So here's a piece that we've done the same. Sandwiched 2 pieces of veneer over a plywood core. I've pressed it, let it sit overnight, taken it out, and I've used a random orbit sander to clean up the surface. I've got the sander here, and we'll just do the final pass. And let's just put a finish on there, because the first application of finish always brings out the colors of the wood. And in this case, I'm going to use a shellac finish. And you can get an idea what the finished piece is going to look like.
So that concludes our program today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed being here with Matthew Werner. If you'd like any more information on us, the program, or Matthew, you can contact us or him at the website that you'll see on your screen. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us again.